And I'm going to turn it over to Norm now.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Phil King and I are in his office in Albuquerque. LaDonna Clayton is in Clovis and has not yet joined our meeting because she's attending a city commission meeting to talk about the same things that we're going to be talking to you about. And it's about the issues of the Ogallala Aquifer on the east side of the state. Their aquifer has already been emptied of water and they are in desperate shape. So LaDonna is going to fill us in, and we wish her well at the Clovis City Commission this evening. We're going to start with Phil. The focus of this workshop is on the legislature because they still don't get it, that water is an urgent problem in New Mexico. It's really a crisis. You know, we're going to hear that from Phil, but the legislature hasn't woken up. And I'll have more remarks about that later. Many of the leaders have, but the legislature as a body still underfunds water dramatically. Water needs and deserves much more than the governor's initial budget and the legislative initial budget going into this 30-day budget session have provided. So we hope to tell you about some of those details this evening. And without further ado, let me introduce Phil, who will introduce himself.
Okay, thank you, Norm. My name is Phil King. I am fairly recently retired from New Mexico State University. I retired in 2021. And I have recently undertaken working with the Interstate Stream Commission and State Engineer's Office to help in the regional planning effort. So I'll be talking about some of my motivation for making that change of venue here today. Shall we go to...
Thank you.
Okay, let me explain my background.
Oh, we can't see your screen. We can't see the slides.
We're not seeing the slides?
No, sorry to interrupt. We can't see the slides.
Too many steps for me. Sorry.
Hey, you should have got a real computer.
Okay, we'll get there.
You got to do the share screen.
Yeah, I do.
You got it there now?
No.
Not yet. Please bear with us. We're having a few technical difficulties this evening. Please take a moment to use this time to introduce yourself in the chat, and please let us know if you have any questions.
Let's see.
Norm, do you want me to pull it up?
I got it. I hope this is the right one. Nope. You better pull it up, Brittany. No, Phil needs control of this, so pardon me, I will get this straight in just a minute.
We're so grateful to have you all here tonight, and we will be having a survey at the end of the meeting. It should automatically pop up in your browser when you leave the meeting. It's incredibly helpful for us to have you fill those out. Even if you filled out a prior one, it helps us design our program for the rest of the year. And if you have anything that you'd really like us to present on, we would love to hear that sort of feedback. We want this to be as useful for you as it is for everyone, as it is for us, more useful for you than it is for us. So please give us your idea.
Come up, click right there. That's the one.
Aha, we can see it now.
I've been doing this for 4 years now, and that's my first time to do it on a Mac.
Use the cursors.
It's just going to close.
Okay.
All right, it doesn't matter. So anyhow, I'm as of late last month, I began working with the Interstate Stream Commission and Office of the State Engineer to help with groundwater governance generally in the regional planning process. Click. I'm also a consultant at Elephant Beat Irrigation District, and a lot of people know me in that role. I was at New Mexico State for 31 and a half years, and I've been with EBID for about the same length of time. I do have to put in one disclaimer here, and that is I do not speak for either EBID or the Interstate Stream Commission State Engineer. I speak to them, and that's a line lifted directly from John Shoemaker. As I said, I was a professor in civil and agricultural engineering at New Mexico State University. I also had the opportunity to take a sabbatical as a AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, Science and Technology Policy Fellow, and I was posted at the National Science Foundation, where I got to work on climate, energy, and water issues through the National Science Foundation. It was quite enlightening. I've done some more, I guess you'd say, mundane things. I was a board member and chair of both the Leesburg Mutual Domestic Water Consumers Association and the La Union Soil and Water Conservation District, which is now Doñana Soil and Water Conservation District. So I stayed busy in a lot of different aspects of water over the years. I have a bachelor's in civil engineering from UC Berkeley and a master's and PhD in ag engineering from Colorado State. And between the bachelor's and grad school, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Malawi as an irrigation engineer. And summer of 2022, my wife and I went back, and that right there is the house I lived in when I was a Peace Corps volunteer. Now, I hope you all get the literary illusion from this. What I wanted to talk a little bit about is this whole climate change thing. First of all, we've been aware of anthropogenic influences on the climate for actually over a century. Late 1800s, there was recognition that the Industrial Revolution was going to have effects on climate. We have been keenly aware of their detrimental influence for at least 50 years. I think back to 1985 with Carl Sagan addressing Congress. There was no, we've been saying the same thing for at least that long. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been issuing these, just increasingly dire reports for 34 years now. And one of my sort of sideline gigs was to work on the leap ahead analysis that the Interstate Stream Commission and the Bureau of Geology put together back in 2021 and into early 2022, assessing the impact of climate change on New Mexico's water supply. And David Gutzler, who many of you no doubt know, was a climate scientist. He's retired now at University of New Mexico, was also on there. And we actually had IPCC scientists threatening to go on strike because their work was being so roundly ignored by policymakers and governments around the world. So it's not like we didn't know. Our response has been abysmal and continues to be abysmal. Mitigation seems to be not an option. People are looking at it in the short term and saying that it would cost jobs, which is not true. It would rearrange jobs perhaps, but it would not necessarily cost jobs. And the cost of not doing mitigation is orders of magnitude larger than any cost, than the cost of actual meaningful mitigation. There's no doubt about this. It's been researched up one side and down the other. It's clear. I am probably largely preaching to the choir here, so I won't go on about it too long. But in New Mexico here, we have a very diverse and vibrant environment and culture, water culture. As an irrigation engineer, it's just fascinating to work in New Mexico because we have more diverse irrigation cultures than anywhere I can think of in the world. And I've worked in a lot of odd places. However, these have been adapted to the climate cycles, the wet and dry cycles of the past several centuries, and the times they are changing. What we are looking at now is not cyclical. It is, well, there will still be a cycle, but what the climate change we're talking about is a downward trend in our upward trend in our temperature, downward trend in our water supply. On that downward trend, we have superimposed a cyclical climate. Since we have failed as a species at mitigation, and this is already a full-blown crisis, adaptation is the best we can do. It's not ideal, but there you have it. Now, this is taken from the presentation. Some of you may have seen this before. We did after the Leap Ahead analysis climate change report came out, we did a round of webinars, and you undoubtedly sat through this, but I wanted to bring this one up for the very clear. I'm going to show you an actual example of the effect of this on our water supply. So what you see is the blue from 1930 up to 2020. The blue is precipitation, and there's a lot of noise in it. But if you look at these averages over periods, there's not really a very distinct trend. Now look at the temperature, which is the upper one, the red graph, and you see that we chug along until maybe, what is that, 1980 period, around there. And suddenly we start going up the stairs. And this has produced real and observable effects on our water supply that I'll talk a little bit about here in very general terms. Norm and LaDonna will talk more about the ways to try to adapt through our legislature to these. But if you run the statistics, and I used to teach statistical hydrology, there is no reasonable doubt that we are experiencing a significant upward trend in temperature. We're seeing it observed. We're seeing it in models. If we model the future looking forward, the orange line you see is actual observations. The green and red are modeled forecasts looking forward, with the green being the low emission scenario and the red being the high emission scenario. And you see that even if you know which scenario you're in, and there is some uncertainty about that, maybe we'll come to our senses and head towards mitigation in a lower emission scenario. But even if you knew which scenario you were in, you see the width of the bars is very wide, which means uncertainty. And special interests have used that uncertainty to avoid taking any action. Say, well, the science is uncertain. They don't really know what's going to happen. Well, of course, we don't know what's going to happen. As the man said, predictions are very difficult, especially about the future. However, even in the most optimistic scenario there, that is catastrophic climate change that calls for immediate mitigation. This is another one that showed up a lot, and this, people, I've seen a couple of different presenters talk through this, and I was going to do this like an engineer and put some numbers to give you a numerical example. But what you have here are the various components of the hydrologic cycle, where we've got precipitation. The precipitation can either run off or infiltrate and recharge the groundwater systems. It can evaporate directly from the soil surface, or it can transpire through the stomata of vegetation. And the important difference here is the runoff and the recharge stay in the local hydrologic system, whereas the evaporation and transpiration, which we lump together as evapotranspiration and call ET, they even made a movie about it, is lost to the local hydrologic system. It goes into the atmosphere and goes in and goes out and probably rains in Texas somewhere. But if we take these numbers and work through a little numerical example, you've got 75 million acre feet. And again, these are very crude numbers. They're two significant figures, and that's probably one significant figure too many. But transpiration is 75 million acre feet, soil evaporation is 17. So you've got a total of 92 million acre feet of evapotranspiration. That's the consumptive loss in the system. Okay, that's of that 95 million acre feet of precipitation, 92 of it is lost to the atmosphere. If you have a 1% increase, that goes to 92.9. And now I'm going to three significant figures. So this is one embarrassed engineer. The runoff and recharge in the base case are 1.5 and 1.7, so 3.2. However, if we lose that additional 0.9 million acre feet to ET, it comes out of the recharge and runoff. And that 1% increase in ET leads to a 29% decrease in runoff and recharge. Okay, let that sink in. Well, 1%, and 1% is not at all out of the question. 1% increase in ET leads to a 29% reduction in runoff and recharge. If you crank that increase up to 3.5%, the percent decrease is 100%. And we're all living on the Ogallala at that point. That's where recharge essentially ceases, and you've got a purely mined aquifer system. Whoops. Got my cursor in the wrong place. Now, here's a little example of that actually happening. These are real data taken from various sources from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. The first one here may look familiar. What that is, the main graph, and let me just, if I can get that out. Oh, hold on. Can I back up one? Oh, no, never mind. What I did is I took the SNOTEL data, and what this is expressing is the snow water equivalent in inches. So that's the water content in inches of the snowpack up there on the watershed for three representative years here. 2020, 2021, and sorry, that's supposed to be 2022. Blue is 22, black is 23. No, black is 24. Well, yes, it is 22. 23 was not an average year. And what I did, I picked 2020, 21, and 22 because they are roughly average snowpack years. And you can see the green is the median snowpack. This, by the way, is for the upper Rio Grande headwaters. Sorry, I can't see underneath there. It's the Rio Grande headwaters, which is basically the Rio Grande watershed from the Colorado state line upstream. So these are the snowpack that we had in those years, and you see it was average. But if we take a look at the, can I move this? If we take a look at the resulting spring runoff, and the spring runoff, it goes by various intervals, but I picked March through July, which is traditionally the thick part of the spring runoff in the Rio Grande. I picked the ODOE gauge to look at, which is, of course, a critical compact gauge. This is a gauge located just downstream of the confluence of the Rio Grande and Rio Chama. It is the index gauge that tells New Mexico how much water it has to deliver to Elephant Butte Reservoir. San Marcial is a gauge that it was originally a compact gauge, but it was abandoned in the 40s, and the delivery point was moved down to Elephant Butte Dam. But it is basically measuring the Rio Grande inflow into Elephant Butte Reservoir. And so you see, we are at or above average snowpack in the headwaters of the Rio Grande in each of these years, but ODOE is half of median, and San Marcial is a third at best of median. And if you are familiar with the Rio Grande Compact, that should be triggering some alarm bells right about now. Now, this is based on 1991 to 2020 medians. Every 10 years, they advance one decade of the medians that they're using for comparative statistics. So when we talk about ODOE and San Marcial, these are based percentage of the 91 to 2020 medians for that March through July period. If instead we go back and use the 81 to 2010 medians, you see it's even worse. And that's because not only is the volume of water going down, but the medians are going down too. So we may find ourselves, the way we come out of this drought is not by getting more water into the system. It's bringing our average and our median down, basically lowering our standards for what constitutes a usable water supply. Let me get this out of here.
I don't think you can.
Is it
Don't click
okay?
on it. Don't click on it.
Okay. Pardon me if I cancel the meeting. So let's talk about what kind of actions we can take. First of all, there is technology and infrastructure improvements where we can make more efficient use. We can capture water that would otherwise have been lost, some stormwater. We may get in there and pursue desalination or things like that. And we should absolutely do that, because as the commodity becomes scarcer, it becomes more valuable, and investments in these in technology and infrastructure, it mitigates at least the damage done by the lack of mitigation to climate. So they can help a little bit, but you got to look at the numbers, and the increases in supply due to technological and infrastructure investments are much smaller than the effect that climate change is going to have on our water supply. Speaking in the lower Rio Grande, in a good year, we might capture 10 or 15,000 acre feet of stormwater. We're seeing shortages on the order of 100 to 200,000 acre feet over long-term averages. So it's an order of magnitude less. So we need to do more than just technology and infrastructure. One thing that's going to likely happen, and is already happening, is a shift in water use from agriculture to domestic, commercial, municipal, and industrial, which is the hottest new acronym that we're using for M&I. It's basically a broader term than M&I. We're going to see a migration of water rights and water use from irrigated agriculture to DCMI use. And not necessarily to expand DCMI, but just to maintain it. One thing that a lot of areas have done is they go and they raid their agricultural water supplies to keep their cities going. And what that does is it wipes out your agriculture, and the city continues to grow, and it runs out of water again, only now there's no agriculture to go raid, and all you've accomplished then is wiped out your agriculture. Another critical factor here is if we reduce agriculture too much, you no longer have a critical mass to support the supporting industries like equipment and chemicals and so on and so forth. And agriculture naturally goes away even without having all their water rights acquired. Importation, everybody else in the neighborhood is in just as bad a shape as we are, so don't expect that to solve the problem. The other thing, and by the way, these are all conclusions that came out of the leap ahead analysis, if you want a little more detail on these. But both DCMI and agricultural water users will, particularly in the short term, turn more heavily to groundwater, and they're doing exactly that. EBID started out as a surface water system. Drought of the 50s, they put in groundwater. Now they're running more groundwater than surface water. But the bottom line is that water planning and policy development are going to take some difficult decisions. Everybody wants to keep doing what they've been doing. Status quo is not an option. If we sit on our hands, we have what's called a Malthusian catastrophe, where the population exceeds the resource base, not because, in this case, of an increasing population, but because of a declining resource base. And that's where if you have, a population of rats, they keep growing and growing until they start eating each other. The same things happen with human populations. So dealing with the challenges, we understand the big picture and the devil is in the details. Things we need to get done is better understand, particularly our groundwater system. Our streams we understand pretty well, but when you get into groundwater, as the old saying goes, it's dark down there. We need ready access to real-time and historical hydrologic data. I hope that in 10 years, I laugh at the way I go assemble a data set today, because it's very labor intensive. Plan for hitting the wall. We are going to have places running out. We have places running out already, as LaDonna will talk. We need regional planning to look at this in the stark light of reality, address their local conditions, the strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities in each individual planning unit. As I said, we're such a diverse hydrologic community. There is no such thing as one size fits all, not by a long shot. We're going to have to develop local administrative schemes in this more permanently arid environment. State water planning must integrate the local planning into some sort of a coherent whole, but the real priority is finding what works at the local level, and so that's absolutely critical to the effort here. Have realistic expectations. I know that particularly when talking to legislators, if they invest a bunch of money in something, they don't want it to get worse. Well, it's going to get worse even with those investments, but it will be far better than it would have been without the investments. So you're not comparing the outcome 10 years from now from what it is right now. You're comparing it with what it would be in 10 years without the investment. Finally, there is extreme dependence on initial conditions. And you've all heard the story about if you got an asteroid headed for the Earth and you intercept it out at Neptune's orbit, if you just breathe on it hard, it'll miss the Earth by tens of thousands of kilometers. If you intercept it inside Mars's orbit, you got to set off a nuclear bomb. If you intercept it inside the moon's orbit, you're done. We're probably somewhere in the asteroid belt about now, but action is critical. The earlier we take action, the greater the effect will be. We need to do this with proper scientific foundations in parallel with this principled regional water planning. In fact, the scientific investigations can very much support and interact with the regional planning process. And we've got to develop consensus on shared community vision. What do you want your community to look like in 10, 20, 100 years to guide that adaptation, rather than resorting to the state engineer coming down and shutting down everybody that started using water after 1970 and then 1960 and then 1950. That's just surgery with a chainsaw. The other option is if that does happen, of course, we know that multi-decadal litigation. I am in multi-decadal litigation. This is my second go around. I'm old enough to say that's my second round of multi-decadal litigation. Now, you all know this as the geologic history of the Earth, going all the way from the Hadean back in the beginning of the Precambrian up to the Holocene, which is right here. Mankind evolved in the Pleistocene, in the Quaternary period here. I hope you can read that. We came up in the Pleistocene. The Ice Age ended about 12,000 years ago, and we have been in the Holocene ever since. Almost. Welcome to the Anthropocene. This is the new epoch that we are now in. It's not on this chart, and this is the latest one for the Geologic Society of America, but they're still arguing about exactly when it began. Did it begin 100 years ago? Did it begin 50 years ago? There are arguments for each. So they're arguing about it. It is a lot more than just climate change, but it's the time when human activities have affected the Earth's geology. And we are doing it with climate. We're doing it with waste. We're doing it with microplastics. But this is the Anthropocene. And the unfortunate fact of life is that water management that thrived during the Holocene goes extinct in the Anthropocene, just like the woolly mammoth did, going from the Pleistocene to the Holocene. And with that, I'll shut up.
Phil, thank you very much. Bill was modest in his introduction to himself. He was one of the contributing authors of the Leap Ahead analysis and did yeoman's work trying to spread the word on what that means, and is continuing to that day, as are the other contributing authors of that fantastic scientific effort, which, by the way, won a national award. A prestigious national award for one of the best reports, I guess the best report in a geological estate.
In environmental geology, yes.
Yeah, incredibly.
No, and I'm telling you, that was the best in 31 years of academia. That was the best panel I've ever worked on.
LaDonna Clayton has joined us now, I think. LaDonna, would you please provide us with your thoughts?
Hi, and thank you, Norm. I'm so glad to be here this evening, and I really appreciated Phil's presentation about Driving Point. The points home about what we're facing, and that it's not just about climate change. There are so many things going on in regards to the issue that we're faced with. So thank you, Phil, not only for your expertise, but for the way that you eloquently unpacked what we're facing in water scarcity. And it goes, I mean, so far beyond what, we may be considering or understanding from the initial get-go, but you have enhanced that understanding, and I really appreciated what you presented. What I want to say is I want to add to the conversation of water scarcity and some of the points that Phil made, that it's got so many facets to it. It's not a simple issue. It's a complex issue. But when it comes to groundwater, it's a different type of issue. So on the eastern side of New Mexico, everyone knows, or most people know, you may not all know yet, but we're dealing with a very serious issue because the only water source that we have is the Ogallala Aquifer. And it is a finite source of water, and it is being depleted at a very, very rapid rate. It is being completely mined, and we are trying to address this primarily by saving the groundwater and trying to slow down the mining. And how are we doing that? We're doing that through, first and foremost, water right lease agreements, which we have engaged in with a group of agriculture producers who were major users of the Ogallala Aquifer. And they willingly came forward. They're voluntarily coming forward to say, we recognize where we find ourselves in eastern New Mexico, and that time is limited to save this water for the good of the many. So that's where we're at in Clovis, New Mexico, in eastern New Mexico. However, Portales, that I'm working really closely with right now, is facing much more dire circumstances. So Portales is currently on stage 3 emergency water restrictions, and they're advocating for emergency funding as we speak. Just in the last 48 hours, they've requested emergency funding to support that community, because the aquifer mapping that was done for them, as it was done simultaneously for Curry County and the area, showed they would be out of water by 2023, that they would reach this point that it couldn't support agricultural production any longer, and they would just have a very minimal source of water left to support domestic needs. That's exactly where they find themselves. So this is truly a real issue. This is not, it's going to happen down the line. It already happened today. So what Norm talks about in features and what Phil is talking about in featuring, what they're really trying to bring a spotlight on is real time happening in eastern New Mexico. I could talk about Texaco. I've talked about Portales. I've mentioned Clovis. I can take you down to Floyd. I can take you to Elida. I could take you down the whole eastern New Mexico side and point out where we are seeing water scarcity. So I just want to highlight the issues that we're facing and how important it is to get extremely aggressive and to not take no for an answer. When we tell people water can't wait, it can't wait. It's already quit waiting. We made the mistake of thinking or continuing to exist as though we had a water supply that would never be depleted in the Ogallala. That was a mistake. We heard the alarms 50 years ago. I mean, there were already projections way back from great hydrologists and researchers who said, you better keep an eye on this. People are pumping for irrigation farming at a higher level than ever before. In eastern New Mexico, we are using 93% of the water for irrigation farming. That's a massive amount of water to be used. So we just did not heed the warning signs. And now what I can tell you about my community and this side of New Mexico is people are taking this seriously for the first time on many levels, but yet I still have those who are not so sure it's as advanced as we're saying, not so sure that we're really facing this issue, not so sure about climate change. But I believe that the message is beginning to take hold. I believe that everyone who's attending this message, this evening's presentation, needs to keep driving home the message. This is not a myth. This is reality. And it's just going to continue to get worse if we do not take the water scarcity issue seriously and begin to fund these important efforts or initiatives at the legislative level to arrest the behavior or to greater inform ourselves, to get really important tools in place to try to address water scarcity. The Water Data Act is huge to us on eastern New Mexico. And I promise you, as I continue to work with a larger and larger area here in eastern New Mexico, their thoughts are, well, where's all, number one, the data? Where can we get case study information? Where can we just tap into what people are doing to try to address the water scarcity? How can we replicate that? What are the ideas out there? What are the innovations? So we need to make that available to people across the state, not just eastern New Mexico. And as I shared recently at the Water Dialogue, there are about 250 communities that are right on the cusp of where we find ourselves in eastern New Mexico. So I just want to highlight that again and encourage you to consider the importance of coming on board and being fully 100% a water advocate for this water scarcity issue. And I want to thank the water advocates for what you've done so far, for who you are, you are relentless. You continue to share the message and you continue to stay united. And I'm telling you, I wouldn't be where I am today in my messaging if it weren't for water advocates. So thank you so much, Norm, for having me this evening and for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, LaDonna. One quick question for you. Did the city commission go well for you?
Yes. Thank you so much. It went really great. The city commission was excited to learn of the progress that we're making in saving 40 years now of a supplemental water supply. We believe that we'll have 40 years once the water's in the perpetual conservation easements. So it will give that supplemental water supply to the city that they were so hoping for. And the meeting went great. Thanks, Norm.
Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to mention, I think it's important, Phil King and LaDonna and I were all members of the state engineers 2022 New Mexico Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force. And we had an extremely diverse group of people, and we came up with consensus recommendations. Some of those recommendations are being acted on. And what I want to talk to you tonight are about two recommendations in particular, maybe three, that are not. But I have a few general things that I'd just like to say, first as an introduction. One is that I remember David Gutzler, who was one of the contributing authors of the report, and an editor too, I believe, but I'm not sure. He was invited by Chairman Matthew McQueen of the House Energy and Natural Resources Committee in 2019 to basically, Matthew devoted the entire first session during the legislature, which was a long session that year, to hearing from Dr. Gutzler on climate change. And I remember distinctly at the end of his remarks, he literally said, "I plead to you to take action. I plead to you to take action." We're still talking about those fundamental actions in 2024. In 2019, Representative Melanie Stansbury, some of you may remember, she had conducted listening sessions around the state with groups, and she presented a consolidated report of her findings, first to legislative committees, but also to the Interstate Stream Commission. And we're going to drop a copy of Melanie Stansbury's 3-page report, a link into the chat. So please take a look at that. I just went through it. It's just amazing how many things she listed. In fact, I'm not sure she listed anything in 2019 that we've taken care of yet. I don't think we've taken care of a single thing except maybe passing the Water Security Planning Act, which is just a beginning. It's not an end. The legislature is not listening to us, folks, and neither is the governor. And I think that that's my message for you tonight. What is it going to take to get them to listen? What is it going to take to get them to realize that water is life, and without water, there is nothing? That water insecurity is economic insecurity. And without New Mexico's, the states, and all of our communities and regions' stewardship of our scarce and growing scarcer water, we have no future in New Mexico. We have no future. Given the crisis we're in every region in New Mexico, and particularly in those regions where groundwater is the only source and it's been pumped for a century. Given that, shouldn't we begin to pay attention to finding out how much water we have left? Shouldn't we know how fast it is declining? How can we possibly plan for a more resilient future if we can't answer these questions in a scientifically valid way? And we can't. We don't know how much water we have left. The people deserve to know that, and we're getting the back of the governors and the legislature's collective hands. And I'm not going to go down the road too far here, but I do want to say some things that I think are very important. You know, in New Mexico, water is a public resource and it's owned by all the public. Rights are given out for its use. Those are property rights. They're serious, enforceable rights. There's not enough water to meet all those rights. We have so much more paper water than we have wet water. But the sovereign is in charge of all of that. New Mexico is the sovereign with sovereign responsibility for the public health, safety, and welfare of the people. And there is no such thing as the public health, safety, and welfare of the people unless we have water security. So the sovereign has three branches. It has the judicial branch, the executive branch, and the executive branch. Now, my view is that, and this is just my view, that the judicial branch is pretty friendly to water. They come down to the right decisions most of the time. But I think that both the executive, and this is a complicated thing, and the executive is not only the governor and the governor's office, but it's all the agencies and all the people that work in the agencies and all the commissions, that do the state's work and the citizens. The executive has two faces. One face smiles and says they're going to take care of us, and we want an appropriation of $500 million, to give a big financial grip to some huge company out of the country who can plop a desal plant somewhere, and who knows where the water's going to go because there's no planning. Why are we spending or proposing to spend money on things like that when we're not funding the water basics of implementing the Water Data Act and accelerating the aquifer mapping program that LaDonna just spoke about? With data, Chloe has paid attention, and they are in much better shape than Portales, who did not pay attention. And that's what the aquifer mapping program and the Water Data Act are all about. So, I have this cartoon in my head of the sovereign with one smiling face and then two two-faced heads, the executive and the legislature. And that doesn't mean, as I said, that there aren't great people, great leaders, great staff busting their butts to get the job done for us. The legislative leadership is on our side, but where is the legislature as the body? Many in the executive are on our side, and the governor says that she is for water, but she doesn't put her money, she doesn't put the state's money where the state needs it to be spent. It is that plain. The bottom line, the sovereign's not getting the job done. And Representative Stansberry pointed that out in 2019, and nothing has changed. So I want to go on to the specific issues that you gathered here tonight to learn about. There's a list of 6 legislative priorities of the Water Task Force, and I should say there are priorities of members of the Water Task Force, because the Water Task Force doesn't exist anymore. But we've had a difficult year. The Water Task Force members who are still want to be active in getting organized without the state's, assistance, because they are running ragged. They have so much work and they have good people to do it, but they don't have the resources that they need to do their jobs for us, for the people, for New Mexico. So the first item on our legislative list was capacity. And I understand the governor's budget provides for 27 of 31 positions requested by the state engineer of the Interstate Stream Commission. And that is good. That is great. But guess what? The LFC budget does not. The legislative budget does not. Neither the governor's budget or the LFC budget is fair. Neither of them prioritize implementation of the Water Data Act. The 2019 Water Data Act that the 2023 Water Security Act, let me back up and make that less complicated. We can't do water planning without the organized data. And the act actually says, the Water Security Planning Act says that the state will provide the data for the planning through the Water Data Act initiative. But they're not funding the Water Data Act initiative, and they never have appropriated. The Bureau of Geology put out, as it has to do every year for the legislature, its report in 2023 saying what they needed, and they're getting a pittance of what was requested. But you know what the shocking thing to me is that I found out that only the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources and the Energy, Mineral, and Natural Resources put in a specific request for people to implement the Water Data Act. They say that the other agencies, the State Engineer, Interstate Stream Commission, the Mexico Environment Department, who's the other one, Phil? I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. They didn't put, they might have mentioned staffing and IT and it's for data, but there's nothing specifically that says I need these positions for the Water Data Act. But the Bureau of Geology said that we need 23 positions, just 23 across the state and all the agencies to fully implement the act. We have to accelerate that. But the legislature doesn't think that's important, apparently. And the horrible thing, horrible, it's not horrible, it's human, it's the way humans are. We don't even name our problems adequately. How can you solve a problem if you don't put a name on it? If you don't tell the plain truth about it. And so it's time to start naming problems. The state's water agencies and water administration in general need vastly more resources than they are being given by the people with the power to provide those resources at a time when we have extraordinary surpluses in our budget. It just blows my mind. So capacity, we need staff across the board, and I can't get into the details, but we don't begin to have the capacity. That was a recommendation, a unanimous recommendation of the Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force, the capacity and increase, because without capacity at both the state and the local levels, we can't solve our problems. And we have to have the state.
That one didn't even take any debate.
Yeah. We passed the Water Security Planning Act, but we don't have the resources to implement it. The state passed that act unanimously last year, and they debated it and they changed it, and it represents the will of the legislature. And it's a good bill. It's an excellent framework, but they appropriated $500,000 to begin implementation. And they increased the staff of the Interstate Stream Commission Water Planning Bureau. They're up now 300%. That's because they started with one only about a year ago. And then the aquifer mapping program. People deserve to know how much water we have left. We've been pumping these aquifers for a century. We've been exploiting them for a century. And, I heard a question from Representative Pamela Hurden asked at the Water Leaders Conference in Las Cruces in early December. She asked a state official if aquifers were managed by the state engineer office by, I think it was the level in the aquifer or the volume remaining. And the answer was ambiguous, and it implied that there was administration of wet water. But the fact is there is no administration of wet water in this state, except in a couple of areas. One aquifer that I can think of, the only managed aquifer in New Mexico is the Pecos Valley Artesian Conservancy District aquifer. The legislature decided to conserve that aquifer in about 1930. And the job has been done. It's in steady state right now, but they have climate change too coming. But what the legislature apparently didn't realize is that you can destroy an aquifer not by just letting it flow on the ground like an artesian aquifer, but by using it until it's gone. In 2 or 3 generations of New Mexicans, that's where we are. The Okalala and Clovis and Portales are canaries in the coal mine for us. We had better wake up. So vast resources are needed for aquifer mapping, and actually it's not that vast in terms of the money that's being expended by the legislature. It's minuscule. Aquifer mapping needs $10 million a year to drill monitoring wells and research wells and equip them, put them online so we know what the levels are in the aquifer. We know the characteristics of the aquifer because these are scientifically installed monitoring wells. We understand the aquifer, its characteristics. We know how fast it's declining. We know how much water is left. And that is the most urgent priority that we have, in my opinion, that and water data. Well, they're all urgent, but they're not being funded by the legislature. Funding for regions. You know, the Water Security Planning Act says that planning is to be conducted according to a set of rules that are great rules. You know, we have the law, we have ISC rules and regulations that they're going to be asking for comments on this year so that they can finalize them next year. So people think about what comments, what do we need to see in these rules? But the important point here, the rules are in place and the planning is bottom up. Water is a community problem. Community problems require community-based solutions. And research into the problems is not reaching the people. So please take action for water funding. It's going to be hard to track all these different appropriation bills through the legislature. Most of these appropriations are not going to have bill numbers. If they do have bill numbers, they'll be introduced and then they'll be tabled in a finance committee. So what people need to do is write their legislatures respectfully that they pay attention to water. Ask them to recognize that New Mexico is truly in a crisis, as you've heard described tonight. And ask them to fund water. You know, the legislature often talks about custom, culture, and tradition with respect to water in New Mexico. And we honor that. And we have to continue to honor custom, culture, and tradition in our water uses because that's who we are. That's what New Mexico is. You know, but the legislature has a custom, culture, and tradition of passing good bills and not funding them. And that's a custom, culture, and tradition that the legislature needs to leave behind this year by funding all these tools that they put in place and that we have to secure our future. So I'm sorry I don't have more specifics for you tonight. The specifics exist. To the extent we can get them together, they will be on our website. We are working hard to stand up a new website, hopefully by the beginning of next week, that will report on the status of funding of these broad categories of funding. You know, not the specific line items, but the broad categories: aquifer mapping, water data, capacity, money for regions, taking the recommendations that came out of the Water Task Force and actually putting them into agency strategic plans. We also need to get the agencies to name their problems. Now, we won't do that through the legislature. But if the agencies that are called directing agencies, that are supposed to be directing the Water Data Act, are not even putting money as line items in their budget that say Water Data Act, that means they're not naming the problem, that data is a big problem in New Mexico. We have to name our problems. And I think that I'm right at the time when I wanted to start to take questions. So the way we're going to take questions, I think, is I would like Brittany to recognize people to ask us questions online, please.
Certainly. I think our very first question came from Carl Peterson. Carl, would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
And if
it looks like he's attempting to do so, but perhaps not.
Yeah, well, it may be issue. Maybe you could read the question while he's trying to.
No, he just unmuted, so we should be good. Carl, please go ahead.
Norm, I apologize. I was having dinner here and stuffing my face when you called on me. My question is, could you guys give me an opinion on what you think of the governor's plan for a $500 million emergency water budget? And she wants to buy that water, as I understand it, from produced water stores that have been socked away. So I won't go any further because I don't know much more, but I'd sure like to hear your opinions.
Well, I'll give my opinion because I've given it publicly before. Well, I haven't said this. My personal opinion is that the governor went to the IPCC conference in the oil producing states in the Middle East, where all kinds of people are talking about desalination, where all the Saudis' water comes from desalination, where these huge European companies, can plop down a desal plant next to the ocean and get desal water, and they could do that in the Lower Rio Grande and they could do it elsewhere in New Mexico. But what's the plan for using it? And why now? Why aren't we focusing on the basics instead of why isn't that $500 million being appropriated to deal with the water basics? That's about how much we need right now. We could use $500 million. And another thing, if I can say, the legislature always cuts water budgets back. Always. It's like the agency asks for 10 and they say, yeah, you need 10, but we're going to give you 8. Or you need 10 and we're going to give you 2. These days, the legislature should take an agency request. Now think about it. The legislature doesn't have staff. They depend on the agencies for staff. The agencies tell them what they need, and they ignore their agencies, in terms of what the seriousness of the recommendations. So I would like to see the legislature fund every agency request that has to do with water and give them 10% more and tell them to use their imagination and their motivation and see what they can do with it. Give them enough resources that they can go and get the job done for us, because there's plenty of excellent people that would like to do that, just that. Now, I'm sure Phil has something else to say about that.
I'm not all that intimately familiar with the specifics of the question you asked, but I agree with Norm. There are so many just basic needs out there. I always worry when people, as a civil engineer working with a lot of infrastructure and things like that, what you find is that it's easy to get funding for big, new, shiny infrastructure that you can name after somebody. And nobody wants to fund maintenance or rehabilitation because it doesn't get anybody's name in there and it's just not all that sexy, but it is absolutely necessary. It's more necessary than a lot of big, new, shiny toys.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Carl.
Say again, Norm?
You're up, Carl.
Oh, that was me that asked that question.
Well, I know, but Carl has his hands up, so I want to move to him.
Oh, Carl.
There's
Braithwaite.
yes,
Yeah.
There's 2. Carl Baithworth, I think, has his hand up. Carl Peterson, thank you for your prior question.
Can you unmute, Carl?
Carl Baithworth. Wait, Baithwaite. My apologies. You're muted, Mr. Baithwaite. You're still muted.
I better let Brittany ask the question so she can unmute you.
Unfortunately, Carl, Mr. Baithwaite did not put his question in the chat, so I can't ask that one. But we could turn to, while Mr. Baithwaite is unmuting himself, we could turn to Susan Homer, who had asked a prior question in the chat. Susan, are you able to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, I was wondering if the Agua aquifer is about out of water, what's happening in the Permian Basin, how are the oil and gas people managing? Where do they get their water from? They need a lot of water for their drilling, don't they? And their processing.
LaDonna, can you take that question?
Yes, thank you. No, that's a great question. I'm not working directly with the Permian Basin. However, they have reached out to me to express concerns. I've had a couple of people talk to me about how they're affected and wanting to engage with the Ogallala Land and Water Conservancy about our work in regards to how it may help the Permian Basin area. They do use still oil and water, water for oil and gas. So that's going to continue to be an issue because we just don't have the water supply to support that endeavor any longer, any more than we have for irrigation farming. And that's just a fact. I mean, it cannot be changed that support cannot continue. Dr. Jeff Rawling, based on the aquifer mapping research of the past years, in our most recent study, we decided to engage in another aquifer mapping study, tells us that the static water levels are continuing to decline at a rapid rate, which will not support irrigation farming. And I've told and shared with Norm that we've reduced some pumps to 5 horsepower pumps in these wells as supplemental wells continue to be approved. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter how many straws you put in the Ogallala aquifer, you're just trying to get a race to the bottom. That is true for the Permian Basin. And as Phil said, we have to do things differently. We can't continue the way we always have. It is a stark reality and it is a fact. So as a people, we have to accept this, and then we have to act honorably and respectfully and responsibly in this regard. So that's a great question. And yes, they do draw from the Ogallala aquifer again, and they cannot continue to draw as they have been in the past.
Thanks, LaDonna.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Next question, Brittany.
I believe we have Mr. Braithwaite. And again, I apologize if I have butchered your name there. I believe you are unmuted now, so please go ahead and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to mention, Norm, that in 2019, I was the staff person who went around with Melanie to the listening sessions, and we learned a great deal, and it was too bad that we lost her. But I've worked in the political system long enough to know, unless we get 1 or 2 at least champions willing to fight this, we will have a long, difficult time. In 1970-72, I was in the U.S. Senate as a staffer, and the person who dominated the issue was Ed Muskie, and led the whole effort on the Clean Water Act in 1972. We have to find some way to get some people willing to spend the time in the legislature, and that's hard to do. We might want to talk offline a little bit about who might be persuaded to play that kind of role in the legislature.
Thanks,
Do you have any beginning ideas?
Well, Senator Stefanik has been a champion for us, and they're Senator Worth, Senate Majority Leader Worth is just marvelous on water, and Mamie Stewart, President Pro Tem Mamie Stewart is. The House has lots of representatives who are very concerned about water, and Susan Herrera, Chair Susan Herrera, Chair of the House Ag and Water Committee, and Senator Liz Stefanik, Chair of the Senate Conservation Committee, the 2 committees that deal with water in the legislature. They sponsored the 2023 Water Security Planning Act, which passed unanimously. So we have champions, but we need people who know more, or they need to not know more. They just need to fund the agencies where the experts are. I mean, all they need to know is that water is a crisis, and they have lots of money And unless they spend some of that money on water, New Mexico has no future. I mean, what is obtuse about that message? Nothing. Thank you, Carl. I'd love to talk to you.
Rosemary's got her hand
I
up.
believe we have Rosemary Romero next. Would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Brittany. Hi, advocates. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak. Just briefly, is I'm trying to figure out how to move the needle forward as well. And so this has been a really important conversation. Part of the role I'm playing is with the water ambassadors to move the needle forward on a couple of issues. And I'm taking notes, Norm and Phil, on possibilities for the water ambassadors to move that needle forward with maybe some op-eds. And these are just ideas. Op-eds, I'm looking for advocacy tools that you might all be able to prioritize to get moving. I realize that the legislature is a short one and our time is really, really short. So I'm hoping that between me pushing you all, and you'll allow me to push you, is coming up with whatever it takes. I hear the angst, and I'm trying to remember how far back, thinking back to the 90s of the heyday of regional water planning really coming forward, the dialogue starting. It's time, and there's money, and I think there's energy to move the needle forward. So what I'm looking for is just to say, I think there's opportunities that I'm going to help the ambassadors with, and look forward to, more ideas. I've just captured several ideas from this conversation and appreciate the time. And thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Rosemary, for your comments. And, those of us who are water ambassadors are grateful that you've been engaged. I also think it's telling that the state didn't have the resources to pay you to engage. It was Thornburg Foundation.
Yeah.
So here we are in the middle Rio Grande. We're going out and looking for money right and left so we can begin our planning. Ladonna Clayton is after federal money because there's no state money available. It hasn't ever been, to help the Ogallala or curtail the situation there. And the state engineer is still he's still accepting applications for additional wells. I mean, it just makes no sense. So where was I going with that? Oh, all I wanted to say is I think language about moving the needle is not the right language. We can't afford to just move the needle anymore. We have to we better, I don't know what the analogy is, but moving the needle is not enough. We've been moving the needle a tiny bit, for a long time. Maybe we're going backwards. Next question, please.
Does anyone else have a question? I don't see any other hands, and we don't have any additional questions that were pre-asked in the chat. But if you do have a question, please raise your hand.
Oh, use the other hand.
I see that Ralph Bronze now has his hand up. Ralph, would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Norm. Hi, Phil. Hi, LaDonna. Ralph Rons, I'm a member of the board of the New Mexico Water Advocates. I just wanted to chime in that the Water Advocates Board decided to send or deliver thank you cards to each of the 112 legislators for the passage of Senate Bill 337 last session. And each of those, or many of those, were customized to members of the Senate Finance Committee and also to the chair and vice chair and several members of the House Appropriations and Finance Committee. So for those of you on this workshop, if you're so inclined, you know how to check out nmlegis.gov to find out who those members are of the Senate Finance. So the House Bill 2, which is going to have the financing for the state government, first makes its way through the House Appropriations and Finance Committee. So those would be, you know, the chair is Nathan Small, and the vice chair is Meredith Dixon. So please begin to call these legislators and tell them. And Brittany Gom dropped in the chat. She dropped the and maybe Brittany, you could do it again. We have a sheet that lists our top priorities for funding that we need the legislature to act on. And so please begin to make your calls to the House Appropriations and Finance Committee members, especially the chair and the vice chair, to make sure that they begin to to make sure they add those things to House Bill 2, HB 2. And then we have to follow up with the Senate Finance Committee because that's where it's going to land last. And if there's anything that the HAFC misses, we have to count on the SFC, the Senate Finance Committee, to shore it up. Well, no question there, just imploring those on this call to please begin to do that. And now is the time to do it for House Bill 2 because they have all kinds of things they're looking at. You know, water, as you've heard Norm say, is not one of them, regrettably. So yeah, that's my comment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. Yeah, look for anything about water scarcity and, you know, a crisis in the governor's State of the State speech. It's not there. Hey, Scott, how are you?
Hello, Norm. I know Norm fairly well. I'm current president of the Adobe Whitewater Club, and I'm involved with the Kayak New Mexico. I'm very naive with all the regulations just entering into this. I was interested in it. I can't cite any back history of political
recording in progress.
But I do have a question about the water that I posted into the chat. Maybe Norm can explain that a little bit.
Sorry, what's the question, Scott?
Well, I'll go ahead and read it. When water is drawn from an aquifer and brought to the surface, when is it no longer water? Is it lost to evaporation, transpiration, or runoff to another region and not restored back into the ground system, or is it changed to something else?
Well, water, let's take water in the Rio Grande, for example. The water that's in our aquifer came from the Rio Grande. And if we pump water out of the Rio Grande and use it, it's almost like using surface water. What the pumping does is it creates a hole in the aquifer, if you will, that the river tries to fill that hole with gravity. So gravity is the senior user on the river, if you will. It takes the water and nobody can say anything about it, even if the pumping is done by a junior, the junior water. Now, as to the fate, it's the fate of all the other water.
Yeah, you also have groundwater that flows in the subsurface or emerging to the surface into a river. And if you pump and withdraw that groundwater that would otherwise have been tributary to the river, then that's a process called capture. You're not literally pulling water out of the river. You're intercepting water that was on its way to the river, so it doesn't make it.
But is that water gone forever? I mean, it goes to somewhere else. It's still water. It may be in another region, but where does it go?
Well,
it depends on what you're doing with it.
If you pump water and you take it into your house, Scott, and it runs through your plumbing and goes back to the wastewater system and gets discharged back to the river, it's still water. If you water your grass with it, it's gone. And it doesn't matter whether it's surface water or groundwater.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Did that help?
Thanks, Scott. I believe Betsy had her hand up also. Betsy, did you have a question?
Well, I have a concern. I think that we need to be using the phrases of, for example, that LaDonna Clayton uses, because we need short phrases that stick in people's heads. And And one of them is without water, there is nothing. And you've been saying that, Norm, and I've been saying that. And I've had other people saying that in letters they're writing to the legislators. But there is definitely not a sense of the urgency of the work that is being done in this particular year, in this particular place. And I don't know if we can even use general media as a way of getting out some of these short phrases that will awaken people to getting in touch with our legislators.
Thank you, Betsy. I mean, my observation would be that the Journal doesn't report. I mean, I take the Albuquerque Journal, I take the Santa Fe New Mexican, I take the Carlsbad Current Argus. I see articles about water in the Current Argus, but it's, you know, sometimes they're balanced. The Journal doesn't have an environmental reporter anymore. They don't report about water at all. Santa Fe New Mexican does a good job, but they can't cover these stories in depth. And you know, with the rise of the internet and social media and the decline of printed newspapers, our community ability, the ability of our communities to communicate about issues is diminished. So I think we have to get some of these. I think it's the people that are going to have to make the noise. We're not going to get steered by the top. It's the people. It's every one of us talking to 10 people who talk to 10 people who talk to 10 people. And they have to be respectful conversations. We're all in this together.
You said that before, and I'm doing that. And the other thing that I did was also make donations to the New Mexico Water Advocates in the names of Senator Worth, Senator Stefanix, and Susan Herrera for their work.
Betsy, you do so much. Thank you for the example that you set and all the people that you talk to. Let's take another question.
Vicky Estrada, I believe you have your hand up, and I think this is the last question we have time for because we do have some action items for you, things that you all want to do. We have a great thing to discuss with you after Vicky has her question.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'll keep mine short. So I've been listening. I'll just share with you though, I'm actually a Senate analyst for the majority in this legislative session on the Conservation Committee. And so what I wanted to ask, I had heard there aren't many water bills that I'm seeing on the docket right now, but I heard from someone who I think was on the Water Task Force, whose first name is Lynn, who's in the House Majority in the House Majority Analyst Group, that maybe the governor's going to introduce some water bills late in the session. So I'm sorry, I'm giving you all that lead in to just ask if I need a name when I'm doing analysis on water bills, that I want to reach out to you all. Who is a person I can call?
Well, I think you could talk to any of us that have spoken tonight. We'd love to talk to you. We have, you could write a note to info at mrgwateradvocates.org. That would go to be distributed to our board. But yeah, please stay in contact. We'd love to be in there with you. That reminds me that there is one bill that I heard is going to drop, and it's $100 million match fund. Only it's not water specific. It's to match all federal matching funds. See, that's another issue. There's tons of federal money out there, and we're not even organized to get it. Mm-hmm. The Water Advocates is gearing up, and we think we are optimistic we're going to be able to get a big grant. And if that's the case, well, never mind.
Okay, I'm just going to put my name and my cell phone and my Senate website or email address so that I can reach out to you. And if any of you would be willing to put your phone numbers in the chat, that would be helpful for me. Thank you.
In touch with you. Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you, Vicki.
And I think we better go to our closing remarks and the specific documents we have available for you.
So, as you have all asked, what can you do? And we have prepared a form letter for you to send to your legislators. And I dropped a link in your chat, and that link is how you find your legislators. And I'm going to drop the next link is going to be our form letter. And what we would like for you to do is open that up, take a look at it, and there are certain places for you to change that letter to make it your own. So you either need to copy it to create a new Google Doc of your very own that you can edit, or copy and paste it into your email browser or another editing tool and change your name, your address, your legislator. And you can make any customized comments that you have at the end of the letter, but this letter is embracing the essence of what we're trying to get forward to our representatives, which is water is critical. We're in a crisis. It's urgent. We must fund water this year. The legislature has a ton of money this year, and so it would be a huge shame if we missed this opportunity. And I don't want you to feel like you have to urgently write all of this down on this sheet. We will be sending out an email tomorrow with the same information. So if you're trying to copy those links down and you're feeling nervous that you're not getting all the information from this slide or from the links that I posted, don't worry, because you're going to get an email from the water advocates tomorrow with the same information. And we would be so grateful if you would take the time to write to your senator and your representative, both of them. It's critically important that we get water funded this year. And then I just want to alert you to our next speaker series date. Our speaker series are all on the third Thursday, starting at 6:30, and you can see we have some great topics coming up. And we will announce speakers as soon as they're confirmed, and you will be getting emails about those, and they'll be in our newsletter. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, you can do so on our website. But we really hope to see you back at these speaker series. It's amazing to have as much participation as we do, and we're really grateful that you attended tonight, and we hope you will continue to attend throughout the year. The only month we won't do it in 2024 is December, because we know everyone is so busy that month, but we will have a third Thursday every single month through all of 2024 except for December. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, Amigos Bravos, League of Women Voters, 350 New Mexico, Interfaith Power and Light, and New Mexico Wild. They help us get the word out for these series, and so we're grateful for that. And then if you have the opportunity to donate, we would really appreciate that. We are a small team, and any donations you make help us fund all of the work that we do, these speaker series, as well as many, many, many other big projects that we're working on. If you'd like to volunteer with us, please write us at info@mrgwateradvocates.org. And then again, as I said before, there will be a survey that pops up at the end of the Zoom meeting in your browser. If you would please take the 2 minutes to do that survey, it's incredibly helpful for us to get that data and figure out how we can be best supportive to this community. We really appreciate your attendance tonight. Thank you, Phil King and LaDonna Clayton, for your wonderful speeches and presentations, and we look forward to seeing you next month at our speaker series.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Ralph, did you have a question?
I believe his hand was still up from last time. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay, and we'll leave the chat open for a little bit so people can copy it. Brittany, do you want to tell people how they can copy the chat?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know if you can copy the whole chat. Yes, you can. You can, at the bottom, there's 3 little dots. at the very bottom of your chat bar, and then save chat, and I believe that'll save a transcript to your home computer. We also post past recordings of all of our speaker series, and with that, we usually post a chat document as well. So take a look for that on our website. If you need information from the chat tonight and you weren't able to get it copied, check back at our website in a few days, nmwateradvocates.org, and the recording and the PowerPoints should be posted along with the chat document.